And I am live. So, hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to Republic News. I'm your hostess, Liviana. I'm going to try a little something different. I've not done this before, kind of, sort of, but I kind of have, kind of, sort of. So I'm going to do my first Saturday news show. And the reason I'm doing this is because last night when I was doing my show, my post-Saint show last night, it got to the point where I was talking about the alleged Russian collusion and blah, blah, blah. And I just couldn't stop myself from laughing at one of the memes that these fools are suggesting somehow influenced the election. And also, I had a little acid reflux attack suddenly, so I had to get off before I died. So I'm going to go ahead and try and cover the rest of that now, which I couldn't do last night, and also go over the other news that I didn't get to, which is really interesting. I had a little over 2 hours last night, and I still didn't manage to cover all the news that I had intended to, because I had someone in the live chat who had a lot of questions, and I like to interact with my viewers and answer questions and so forth. But today I am just going to read the news and make my comments on it. I will look in on the chat, see if you all have any feedback and so forth. I can see that I'm having some buffering with the stream. I do apologize for that. I don't know what's wrong, and I don't know what I can do about it. My connection is stable. It's 4G 3 bars is about the best I ever get out here. So hopefully it will sort itself out momentarily, as it typically does. Also had a couple of disconnections, very brief, last night. I don't know what that was about either. But anyway, the stream seems to have survived relatively intact, all 2 hours and 14 minutes or however long it was. So I'm just going to jump right in here. As I said, I was talking about the Russiagate conspiracy theory last night, and let's be honest, that's what it is. Well, let's be honest, it's bullshit, but yeah, I do want to talk about it and actually go into the details that I didn't get to last night. So the first article that I started reading about this last night comes from The Hill, and it's Russian disinformation campaign included pro-Jill Stein sentiments. This is from the 18th of December. It's by, I don't know, Justin Wise. Yeah. It says, Russia's online disinformation campaign included messaging that supported 2016 Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein, according to a new report prepared for the Senate Intelligence Committee. The report, which was produced by researchers from the firm New Knowledge and the Russian troll farm known as the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, used every major social media platform. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see here. A summation of the report said, quote, there were some pro-Clinton Twitter posts, tweets and retweets. However, the developed left-wing Twitter personas were still largely anti-Clinton and expressed pro-Bernie Sanders and pro-Jill Stein sentiments, end quote, adding that these tactics overlapped with its pro-Trump portion of its operation. It goes on, it talks a little bit, it does say that pro-Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein content was among the IRA's primary themes across platforms during the presidential campaign. It goes on. I'm not going to read all of this. The link is in the video description. If you want to check it out later, please feel free. I'm going to include links to everything I talk about, all of the news, at least, that I go over in today's show in the video description. So yeah, go for it if you want to look at it. But however, my next article comes from Reason, Reason.com, and it says, No, Jill Stein did not cost Hillary Clinton the White House. Senate Russia investigation leads to new rounds of enumerate analysis and bad faith dot connecting, which is precisely what conspiracy theory in the typical sense actually means. There are and have been actual conspiracies. I mean, even the official story the government tells us about the events of the 11th of September 2001 is a conspiracy. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln, according to the official story, was a conspiracy. So, I mean, conspiracies are not something that are impossible and don't ever happen. They have happened, and there are probably some going on right now. But when it comes to things like vague innuendo and unconnected dots and just kind of implying and insinuating things that aren't really supported by the evidence, yeah, that's kind of, well, I mean, I can't really prove this, but yada yada. And I mean, you know, some of that isn't necessarily bad, because there are some pretty weird things that happen. I do not talk publicly about the JFK assassination. I've made one sort of public statement about it. I do think that we don't know the whole truth about that, and that's all I'm going to say about it here in the stream for now. If we ever get the rest of the documents, files, or whatever, and get them unredacted, we might know something that, I mean, it's been 1963, so it's been over 50 years. It's been 55 years now, and what is this great national security thing that they're trying to hide from us? Well, we can't release this. We're redacting this because of national security concerns. No, you're redacting this because someone was and may still be alive at the time of the last release, and may still be, but at least one person was, yeah, anyway. So this article is from the 26th of December. It's by Matt Welch, and it comes again from Reason.com. The December 17th reports commissioned by the Senate Intelligence Committee on Russian attempts to influence the 2016 presidential election have breathed new life into the old Democrat complaint that Green Party nominee Jill Stein cost Hillary Clinton the presidency. Here's a representative reaction from former FBI counterterrorism specialist Ali H. Soufan that was retweeted by former Democratic National Committee Chair Howard Dean. Quote, unfortunately, the Russian strategy paid off. In Pennsylvania, Stein received 49,678 votes. Trump won by 46,765 votes. In Wisconsin, Stein received 31,006 votes. Trump won by 22,177 votes. In Michigan, Stein received 51,463 votes. Trump won by 10,704 votes. And he gives the link to the NBC News story, which is what kicked all this off, basically. I think that was the very first mainstream media report of these new reports. Anyway, this apparently is a lesson that requires relearning and relearning, no matter how many times Howard Dean says batty stuff like, quote, had Stein not been on the ballot, we might not have Trump, end quote. Even granting Dean's anti-competitive hypothetical of removing either a disfavored second-time candidate or an entire political party that has been in the presidential arena since 1996, there is zero reason to believe that a Green-less campaign would have resulted in a Trump-less White House. Take the most plausible of those figures above, Stein receiving 5 times the number of votes in Michigan that separated Trump from Hillary Clinton. How would Stein voters have voted without Stein? Speaking for myself, who did vote for Jill Stein in 2016, had it not been for the Green Party running a candidate, I would have looked at the two choices of a jackass shit sandwich and an elephant shit sandwich and said, I don't want a shit sandwich. And I wouldn't have voted for a presidential candidate. I might have even voted for, what is Aleppo boy? Gary Johnson. But I certainly wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump, and I absolutely can't stand Hillary Clinton. I never have been able to stand her, even when I lived in Arkansas in the 1980s while her husband was governor. I knew who she was before most people ever even heard of her. So, yeah, the Russians have nothing to do with my dislike and distrust for this woman, unless they built a time machine sometime in 2016 and went back to the 1980s and forced her to be what she is. Anyway, and this article goes on. I don't want to read the whole thing in it. I'm not really sure. I'll go ahead and with the next paragraph. While the answer is unknowable, we do have national exit polls that shed some light. For instance, CBS News asked Stein voters what they would have done if faced with a ballot featuring only Clinton and Trump. Results: 61% said they wouldn't vote. 25% said they'd vote for Clinton. 14% said Trump. Applying that formula to Michigan would not be enough to make up that 10,704 vote gap. Let's see, Matt Welch, the guy who wrote this article, tweeted out, quote, if you reapportion Stein's 51,463 Michigan votes according to exit poll answers about what her voters would have done without her on the ballot, you'd get 31,392 not voting, 12,866 voting for Clinton, and 7,204 voting for Trump. Not enough to make up Trump's slim advantage. End quote. You'd have to take an additional 10% of the Michigan electorate out of the wouldn't vote camp and move each and every one into the Hillary camp to cover that Trump-Clinton spread. But wait, keep in mind that the exit poll removed all third-party candidates as options, even though the Michigan ballot also included Libertarian Gary Johnson, who received 3.59% in the state. Stein, 1.07%, U.S. taxpayers nominee Darrell Castle, 0.33%, and the Socialist Party's Angela Nicole Walker, 0.05%. Given the record high unfavorability ratings of the two major party candidates, I think it's more likely that surgically removing only Stein's name and party from the ballot would reduce, not increase, the amount of would-be Green support that exit polls found for two-party candidates. It gives a little chart here. Did third-party candidates cost Hillary Clinton the election? It's kind of a cool looking chart if you want to go check it out. Again, the link is in the video description already. As I go on to the additional stories or additional topics after this Russiagate thing, I will add the links to those articles into the video description as well. But anyway, he points out that other people have talked about this as well. Even WAPO, the CIA mouthpiece owned by Jeff Bezos. And yes, I do say WAPO because they're full of poo. But in this case, he says Vox or the Washington Post or whoever looked at the issue with rationality instead of emotion. Then there's the fact that a post-election poll giving voters a chance for a do-over showed more, not less, support for both Stein and Johnson, with the only real pro-Clinton reversal action coming from those millions of people who sat the election out, including millions of people who voted in November 2016 but left their presidential ballots blank. It goes on. And so this is quite an interesting article. Again, please do go and check it out. It's much better than the Hill article about this bullshit. So I have a couple more articles on this topic. The first one that I'm going to look at comes from The Nation, and it is by Aaron Mate, formerly of The Real News. Let's see. What is the name of this article? Russiagate, elections interference. Where is it? Blah, blah, blah. What's this one? Well, that's not it. I think this is it right here. Yeah. Okay. So this is published on the 28th at 11:33 a.m. by somebody's time zone. I don't know whose. But New studies show pundits are wrong about Russian social media involvement in U.S. politics. Far from being a sophisticated propaganda campaign, it was small, amateurish, and mostly unrelated to the 2016 election, by Aaron Mate. So, he says, the release of 2 Senate-commissioned reports has sparked a new round of panic about Russia manipulating a vulnerable American public on social media. Headlines warn that Russian trolls have tried to suppress the African-American vote, promote Green Party candidate Jill Stein, recruit assets, and sow discord or hack the 2016 election via sex toy ads and Pokemon Go. Right, David Ignatius of the Washington Post writes, quote, the studies describe a sophisticated, multi-level Russian effort to use every available tool of our open society to create resentment, mistrust, and social disorder, end quote, demonstrating that the Russians, quote, thanks to the internet, seem to be perfecting these dark arts, end quote. According to Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times, quote, it looks increasingly as though, end quote, Russian disinformation, quote, changed the direction of American history, end quote, in the narrowly decided 2016 election when, quote, Russian trolling easily could have made the difference, end quote. Would have, could have, should have, yeah, could have, okay. The reports from the University of Oxford's Computational Propaganda Research Project and the firm New Knowledge do provide the most thorough look at Russian social media activity to date, with an abundance of data, charts, graphs, and tables coupled with extensive qualitative analysis. The authors scrutinize the output of the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, the Russian clickbait firm indicted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller in February 2018. On every significant metric, it is difficult to square the data with the dramatic conclusions that have been drawn. So regarding 2016 election content, the most glaring data point is how minimally Russian social media activity pertained to the 2016 campaign. The New Knowledge report acknowledges that evaluating IRA content, quote, purely based on whether it definitively swung the election is too narrow a focus, end quote, as the, quote, explicitly political content was a small percentage, end quote. To be exact, just 11% of the total content, end quote, attributed to the IRA, and 33% of user engagement with it, quote, was related to the election, end quote. The IRA's posts, quote, were minimally about the candidates, end quote, with, quote, roughly 6% of tweets, 18% of Instagram posts, and 7% of Facebook posts, end quote, having, quote, mentioned Trump or Clinton by name, end quote. As to the scale, the researchers claim that, quote, the scale of the Russian operation was unprecedented, unquote, but they base that conclusion on dubious figures. They repeat the widespread claim that Russian posts, quote, reached 126 million people on Facebook, end quote, which is in fact a spin on Facebook's own guess. Facebook's Colin Stretch testified to Congress in October of 2017, quote, our best estimate is that approximately 126 million people may have been served one of these IRA stories at some time during the 2-year period between 2015 and 2017. According to Stretch, posts generated by suspected Russian accounts showing up in Facebook's news feed amounted to, quote, approximately 1 out of 23,000 pieces of content, end quote. As far as spending, also hurting the case, and this is really amazing, also hurting the case that the Russians reached a large number of Americans is they spent such a microscopic amount of money to do it. Oxford puts the IRA's Facebook spending between 2015 and 2017 at just $73,711. That's not even $100,000. As was previously known, about $46,000 was spent on Russian-linked Facebook ads before the 2016 election. That's not even $50,000. That amounts to about 0.05% of the $81 million spent on Facebook ads by the Clinton and Trump campaigns combined. A recent disclosure by Google that Russian-linked accounts spent, get this, $4,700 on platforms in 2016 only underscores how minuscule that spending was. $4,700 on Google platforms, including YouTube. That's it. $4,700. Oh my God, I can run for president, as I said last night. I've got $4,700. Let me go fucking run some ads on Google, and absolutely, I will certainly be president in 2021. I will have won and be sworn in. If this is all it takes, man, come on. This is fucking stupid. These people are stupid. Anyway, let me continue. The researchers also claim that the IRA's, quote, manipulation of American political discourse had a budget that exceeded $25 million USD, end quote. But that number is based on a widely repeated error that mistakes the IRA's spending on U.S.-related activities for its parent project's overall global budget, including domestic social media activity in Russia. As far as sophistication, another reason to question the operation's sophistication can be found by simply looking at its offerings. The IRA's most shared pre-election Facebook post was a cartoon of a gun-wielding Yosemite Sam. Over on Instagram, the best-received image urged users to give it a like if they believe in Jesus. The top IRA post on Facebook before the election to mention Hillary Clinton was a conspiratorial screed about voter fraud. It's telling that those who are so certain Russian social media posts affected the 2016 election never cite the posts that they think actually helped achieve that end. The actual content of those posts might explain why. As far as whether this were a covert or a clickbait operation, far from exposing a sophisticated propaganda campaign, the reports provide more evidence that the Russians were actually engaging in clickbait capitalism, targeting unique demographics like African Americans or evangelicals in a bid to attract large audiences for commercial purposes. Reporters who have profiled the IRA have commonly described it as, quote, a social media marketing campaign, end quote. Yes, the guy who first broke news about the IRA like 2 years before anybody else ever heard of them, before Mueller ever pulled them out of his ass and said, oh my God, look, these are Russian trolls and they influenced the election. Yeah, 2 years before that, like back in 2014, there was a reporter who did an article in the New York Times about this group, the Internet Research Agency, and that was his conclusion, that they were kind of bumbling idiots who were trying to figure out how to use social media in the ways that advertisers do. You know, so they're just fucking around trying to figure out what works, what gets attention, and so forth. Anyway, Mueller's indictment of the IRA disclosed that it sold, quote, promotions and advertisements, end quote, on its pages that generally sold in the $25 to $50 range. Oxford observes, quote, this strategy is not an invention for politics and foreign intrigue. It is consistent with techniques used in digital marketing, end quote. New Knowledge notes that the IRA even sold merchandise that, quote, perhaps provided the IRA with a source of revenue. Oh my God. End quote. Hawking goods such as T-shirts, LGBT-positive sex toys, and many variants of triptych 5-panel artwork featuring traditionally conservative patriotic themes. As far as asset development, lest one wonder how promoting sex toys might factor into a sophisticated influence campaign, the New Knowledge report claims that exploiting sexual behavior was a key component of the IRA's expansive human asset recruitment strategy in the United States. Quote, recruiting an asset by exploiting a personal vulnerability, end quote, the report explains, quote, is a timeless espionage practice, end quote. Yes, it's called a honeypot trap, and it's very effective. It is quite possibly the most effective method used in espionage, is to basically get someone in a compromising position with a sexual paramour, a lover, and get information out of them, or take compromising photographs, or, you know, make video, whatever, record some stuff. Anyway, and then use that to kind of blackmail them, or even get this person to fall in love with the agent, and in that case, then they are turned, sort of. I mean, but there are you know, that's just one of the most effective of several means of getting someone into a personally compromising position. The report explains the first example of this timeless espionage practice is of an ad. Now, this is the one that cracked me up last night, and I lost it, and so I'm going to try to get through this. The first example of this time, you've all seen this. And see, yesterday morning or afternoon, Jimmy Dore, DDJ, maybe some other people also reported on this. And I'm going to go on to the real deal after I read or at least some more of the Aaron Mate article. I'm not shitting on Aaron at all. He's a great journalist. He's one of the few actual journalists around today, so all props to him. But the really telling stuff is going to be the next article that I come to. Anyway, so the first example of this timeless espionage practice is of an ad featuring Jesus consoling a dejected young man by telling him, quote, "Struggling with the addiction to masturbation? Reach out to me and we will beat it together." End quote. But it is unknown if this particular tactic brought any assets into the fold, but New Knowledge reports that there was, quote, some success with several of these human activation attempts, end quote. That is correct. The IRA's online trolls apparently succeeded in sparking protests in 2016, like several in Florida, where, quote, it's unclear if anyone attended, quote, end quote, no people showed up to at least one, end quote, and, quote, ragtag groups, end quote, showed up at others, including one where video footage captured a crowd of eight people. The most successful effort appears to have been in Houston, where Russian trolls allegedly organized dueling rallies pitting a dozen white supremacists against several dozen counter-protesters outside an Islamic center. Based on all of this data, we can draw this picture of Russian social media activity. It was mostly unrelated to the 2016 election, microscopic in reach, engagement, and spending, and juvenile or absurd in its content. This leads to the inescapable conclusion, as the new knowledge study acknowledges, that, quote, the operation's focus on elections was merely a small subset, end quote, of its activity. They qualify that, quote, accurate, end quote, narrative by saying it, quote, misses nuance and deserves more contextualization, end quote. Alternatively, perhaps it deserves some minimal reflection that a juvenile social media operation with such a small focus on elections is being widely portrayed as a seismic threat that may well have decided the 2016 contest. And doing so leads us to, anyway, this goes on, and it's a very good article, so please, by all means, go check it out. The link is in the video description. But I do have one more here that I want to go over on this particular topic before I move on to other things. All right. So this comes to us from Gray Zone, which is original journalism and analysis, and is edited by Max Blumenthal, who's another top-notch journalist. But this particular article is written by Dan Cohen, and it too was published on the 28th. One moment, I'm going to have a sip of my Pepsi and see if anyone out there is giving any feedback. Yeah, YouTube may very well hate us. I don't know. So anybody got anything to say so far? If you can knock down the... Oh, where's my Pepsi? Oh shit, I don't seem to have one open. Oh goodness. I don't have one open, so I'm gonna open one. How about that? So anybody got any commentary or questions about any of this so far? Let's see, I got some Pepsi right here next to me. So I'll just pull a can out. I can see there are 3 people watching, or now there are only 2. So I lost one by stopping my reading of the articles. But yeah, you guys got anything to say about what I've read so far? Because it only gets better. I don't see anything, so I'm gonna carry on, my wayward son. Alright, so this article again comes to us from Gray Zone Project. Gray Zone Project, published on the 28th, which was yesterday, during the morning, I think. And it's by Dan Cohen. And the title of the article tells us, I'm not down some stuff here, so just let me replace it where it goes. The title of the article tells us, Senate report on Russian interference was written by disinformation warriors behind Alabama false flag operation. Hailed by Congress and the media as defenders of democracy, high-tech Russiagate hustlers Jonathan Morgan and Ryan Fox have been exposed for waging an elaborate false flag operation to swing the 2017 Alabama Senate race. On December 17th, 2 reports detailing ongoing Russia interference operations commissioned by the Senate Intelligence Committee were made public. They generated a week's worth of headlines and sent members of Congress and cable news pundits into a Cold War frenzy. According to the report, everything from the Green Party's Jill Stein to Instagram to Pokemon Go to the African-American population had been used and confused by the deceptive Facebook pages of a private Russian troll farm called the Internet Research Agency. You see, troll farm. They're actually not a troll farm. They're just incompetent advertisers. That's it. That's what the New York Times report said, 4 years ago. And so whatever. Anyway, never mind that 56% of the troll farm's pages appeared after the election, that 25% of them were seen by no one, or that their minuscule online presence paled in comparison to the millions of dollars spent on social media by the 2 major presidential campaigns and their supporters to sway voters. This was an act of war that demanded immediate government action. According to Senate Mark Warner, the Democratic chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the reports were, quote, a wake-up call and a bombshell, end quote, that was certain to bring, quote, long overdue guardrails when it comes to social media, end quote. Now, as Jimmy Dore pointed out in his video about this yesterday, that thing, guardrails, that means censorship. So, this is what your good Democrat boy, Mark Warner, is calling for censorship of the Internet. His Republican counterpart on the committee, let's be bipartisan here because this guy's an asshole too, North Carolina Senator Richard Burr hailed the research papers as, quote, proof positive that one of the most important things we can do is increase information sharing between the social media companies who can identify disinformation campaigns and the third-party experts who can analyze them, end quote. So it has a tweet from Mark Warner, quote, incredible, these bombshell reports demonstrate just how far Russia went to $4,700. Oh my God, how far they went. Just how far Russia went to exploit the fault lines of our society and divide Americans in an attempt to undermine and manipulate our democracy. Here's what we've learned, and he gives a link. End quote. But the authors of one of the reports soon suffered a major blow to their credibility when it was revealed that they had engaged in what they called a, quote, Russian-style, end quote, online disinformation operation aimed to swing a hotly contested special Senate election. The embarrassing revelation has already resulted in one of the authors having his Facebook page suspended. The well-funded deception was carried out by New Knowledge, a private cyber intelligence firm founded by 2 self-styled disinformation experts who are veterans of the Obama administration, Jonathan Morgan and Ryan Fox. Morgan began his career as a product manager at AOL before founding a series of startups, some with funding from the United States Agency for International Development and Silicon Valley billionaire Pierre Omidyar's Omidyar Network. Once a Brookings Institution researcher and special advisor to the Obama White House and State Department, Morgan founded Data for Democracy, a volunteer organization said to use, quote, public data to monitor the election system for signs of fraud, end quote. Morgan also developed technology for the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA, the arm of the Department of Defense created for basic applied technological research and futuristic war toys. Rising through the ranks of the national security apparatus, Morgan ultimately emerged as a go-to source for credulous reporters seeking to blame Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump on Russian disinformation. In an interview with the local CBS affiliate in Austin, Texas, Morgan told viewers that feelings of discontent were telltale signs that they had been duped by Russian disinformation. Quote, if it makes you feel too angry or really provokes that type of almost tribal response, then it may be designed to manipulate you. People should be concerned about things that encourage them to change their behavior, end quote, he warned. What a tool. Max Blumenthal tweets, quote, and this is from October 14, 2017. Quote, at Jonathan Morgan suggests Russia deceives Muslims into believing that Obama oversaw a drone assassination program, end quote, and he gives a link. Fox, for his part, is a 15-year veteran of the National Security Agency and was a computer analyst for the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, military unit. JSOC is notorious for its spree of atrocities across the Middle East, including digging their bullets out of dead pregnant women's bodies in Afghanistan. Comparatively little information is available about Fox's background. Since receiving an $11 million investment from venture capital firm GGV Capital in August 2017, New Knowledge has positioned itself as one of the leading private intelligence firms taking on the scourge of Russian disinformation. The outfit made its biggest splash on December 17th when it published one of the two Senate Intelligence Committee commissioned reports. The report, titled, quote, The Tactics and Tropes of the Internet Research Agency, end quote, was overseen by Rene DiResta, a former Wall Street trader and tech specialist who was recruited by Obama's State Department to devise strategies for combating online ISIS propaganda. The New York Times described DiResta as one among a small group of hobbyists who, quote, meticulously logged data and published reports on how easy it was to manipulate social media platforms, end quote. You know, if it's so easy, I ought to just use my $4,700 to get people to come subscribe to my YouTube channel, huh? Because I could use a few more subscribers, eh? Anyway. The Hobby Lobby of online obsessives converged at New Knowledge this year to sound the alarm on supposed Russian disinformation. In a New York Times op-ed published as Americans went to cast their votes in the midterm elections, Morgan and Fox alleged that the Kremlin was secretly running hundreds of propaganda websites in an effort to swing the outcomes. That assertion ran counter to the narrative the two operatives had been spinning out just months before. In an interview earlier in the year, Ryan Fox suggested that despite the Trump administration's multiple rounds of sanctions against Russia, Vladimir Putin was so satisfied with the state of U.S. affairs that the Kremlin had actually cut back on its supposed interference. Quote, strategically, are they content with the way things are? Does it play in their favor to do anything right now? That's a valid question. Keep up the momentum, keep poking away, but do they have to implement drastic measures like hacking the DNC and exposing thousands of emails? Probably not, end quote, Fox said. More recently, Fox claimed to have identified hundreds of Russian-controlled Facebook and Twitter accounts active in France's Yellow Vest movement, which has raged against the country's neoliberal leadership and sparked anxiety among centrist elites across the Atlantic. Centrist, my ass. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal tweets, quote, "There has been some suspect activity," a French cybersecurity official said. "We are in the process of looking at its impact," end quote. It gives a link. However, Fox produced no evidence to support his incendiary accusations, prompting reporters to qualify his assertions as very likely, and wrote that he merely believes Russian interference took place. Well, now, Morgan is also one of the developers of the Hamilton 68 Dashboard, an online project dedicated to inflaming public outrage over online Russian bots, funded by the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy, which is itself backed by NATO and U.S. aid. Hamilton 68 claims to track hundreds of accounts supposedly linked to Russian influence operations. The effort has largely succeeded in drawing positive media attention, despite one of its founders, Clint Watts, admitting that the Twitter accounts it follows may actually be real people who are not Russian at all. When Morgan was asked what techniques Hamilton 68 uses to identify Russian influence operations, he offered a confident-sounding but ultimately empty answer. "We developed some techniques for determining who matters in a conversation. Using some of those techniques, we've identified a subject of accounts that we're very confident are core to furthering the Russian narrative in response to mainstream events. Because Morgan and his colleagues have explicitly refused to name the accounts monitored by Hamilton 68, his claims can never be proven." And this goes on and goes on and goes on. And finally, it may have been that New Knowledge had no knowledge at all of Kremlin botnets, but their reports were nonetheless treated as gospel by droves of credulous reporters eager to make their name in the frenzied atmosphere of Russiagate. According to an internal New Knowledge report first seen by the New York Times, the firm carried out a multifaceted influence operation designed to undermine a 2017 bid by a right-wing Republican former state Supreme Court Judge Roy Moore for an open Alabama Senate seat. By its own admission, New Knowledge's campaign capitalized on the sexual assault allegations against Moore to, quote, enrage and energize Democrats, end quote, and, quote, depress turnout, end quote, among Republicans. To accomplish this, the New Knowledge team created a Facebook page aimed at appealing to conservative Alabamians by encouraging them to endorse an obscure patio supply salesman turned write-in candidate named Mac Watson. They hoped the subterfuge would peel votes away from Moore. It was precisely the kind of tactic that New Knowledge claims Russian troll farms carry out to sow divisions among the American electorate. Morgan told the New York Times the effort stopped there, but the New Knowledge report says the Facebook page, quote, boosted, end quote, Watson's campaign and even arranged interviews for him with the Montgomery Advertiser and the Washington Post. At the same time, Watson's Twitter following mysteriously jumped from 100 to about 10,000. Of the dozens of conservative Alabamian Facebook pages the Watson campaign messaged, the New Knowledge Run page was the only one that responded to it. Quote, "You are in a particularly interesting position, and from what we have read of your politics, we would be inclined to endorse you," end quote, they wrote. New Knowledge then, quote, asked Mr. Watson whether he trusted anyone to set up a super PAC that could receive funding and offered advice on how to sharpen his appeal to disenchanted Republican voters, end quote. While Watson communicated with the deceptive Facebook page, the New Knowledge operators never revealed their identity and the page disappeared the day after the vote. Watson commented to the New York Times, quote, "It was weird. The whole thing was weird," end quote. New Knowledge then sought to manufacture a link between Roy Moore's campaign and the Kremlin by claiming thousands of his Twitter followers were Russian bots. Mainstream media outlets credulously ran with the narrative, insinuating that the Christian theocrat Moore was secretly backed by Russia. The Montgomery Observer first reported the alleged link, Russian invasion. Roy Moore sees spike in Twitter followers from Land of Putin, and it gives the link to that article. From there, it was picked up by Mother Jones, whose headline read, Russian propagandists are pushing for Roy Moore to win. But there was no proof of any Russian connection to the accounts. To bolster its evidence-free claim, Mother Jones simply turned to Hamilton 68, the highly suspect Russian influence monitoring system that Morgan helped design. Today, as can be seen below, Mother Jones is using a bogus story generated by a disinformation campaign to raise funds for more Russiagate coverage, and it gives a screenshot of a donation page. As the Russian bot narrative peaked, Moore blamed the Jones campaign for managing the scare. Quote, it's not surprising that they choose the favorite topic of MSNBC and the fake news outlets, the Russia conspiracy. Democrats can't win this election on the issues, and their desperation is on full display, end quote. Moore's opponent, Jones, said he had no knowledge of the operation. Moore was roundly mocked in liberal circles as a conspiratorial crank, which, you know, I mean, that's true. But New Knowledge's internal report contained a stunning omission. Quote, we orchestrated an elaborate false flag operation that planted the idea that the Moore campaign was amplified on social media by a Russian botnet, end quote. Its authors revealed. While the New York Times says the internal report does not confirm that New Knowledge purchased the bot account themselves, the account's flagrant use of Cyrillic language and Cyrillic alphabet, guys, and profile pictures of famous singers, including Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Avril Lavigne, strongly suggest that whoever bought them went to extreme lengths to leave the appearance of a Russian hand. The article goes on a bit longer, so the point is basically that these guys are claiming that Russia did this and Russia did that, and then they themselves go and do this and do that. So, yeah, maybe not the most fucking credible of sources, huh? So there is that, and that's wrapping up my discussion of the Russiagate conspiracy theory, for the moment at least. I have a few other things I want to look at. Let me just have a look out here and see anybody. What? Hey, man, Pepsi's good. So let's see here. Actually, I prefer ginger ale, but you know, I gotta get my caffeine from somewhere to wake me up, because once you hit my age, you need a little something to get you going after you wake up. And so, yeah. And this is real sugar Pepsi, none of that cow fattening syrup stuff that they try to hawk to you. So I've got both caffeine and sugar coursing through my veins to make me really hyper, huh? I don't ever consume enough caffeine to get the jitters, man. That stuff, I'm not interested in speed at all. So let's see, what's my next article here? I have a combination of some stuff, and some of these will relate back to the first and second articles that I discussed in my show last night. There was one about FDR's second Bill of Rights, or Economic Bill of Rights, and some people who wanted to add like 3 more points to it, which, you know, I looked at it. It's kind of interesting. The one thing that I have some questions about is their support for public banking, because it sounds like American Monetary Institute crap, and those people are wasting their time spinning their wheels trying to do what's not necessary to be done. You know, greening the dollar and nationalize the Fed. Nationalize the Fed. The Fed is already a creature of the federal government. It operates on the basis of what it's told to do by U.S. Congress. Its only independence is insofar as what exactly it does specifically to try to implement what Congress tells it to do. And the reason for this, as I said last night, really shouldn't be that surprising. Most Congress critters know fuck all about economics. So, yeah. And I mean, the Fed chairman can set the interest rate, which, yeah, I'm not too keen on that. But anyway. So there, and the other one that I read was about what they call Blue State Revolt. Los Angeles teachers announced they're going on strike on January the 10th, and there's quite a lot of discussion about neoliberalism in that, and how it's not just Republicans that are trying to fuck over public education and privatize everything into charter schools, but also neoliberal Democrats, corporate Democrats, the Democratic Party establishment. So the next thing I have here to look at, there are quite a few articles I want to look at regarding the Green New Deal idea. But I want to kind of, since I've just kind of alluded to the corporate Democrats and stuff, there is an article that I would really like to bring up, because I have an idea. Did I actually make a copy of this, though? Yeah, here it is. So this comes from a website called termlimits.com. I have no idea who's behind this, and I'm not particularly, I mean, I kind of like the idea of term limits, but most of the people who talk about it, term limits for Congress, want the term limits to be much more restrictive than I would say they should be, because, I mean, it takes time to figure out what the hell you're doing once you get elected. And just about the time you are starting to become effective in Congress is about the time most people want the term limits to kick in and you can't hold the office anymore. So basically you have a bunch of fucking rookies in Congress who don't know what the fuck they're doing, and then suddenly they're gone just as they start figuring out what they're doing. I mean, it does take time. This is not, it's not something that just anyone can do. Just bring them in off the streets. This is one of the reasons I opposed this lottery thing that some people are talking about, that they got the idea from ancient Athens, where you don't run for office and you don't get elected. Everybody just draws lots, and whoever draws the short end of the stick has to be a member of the legislature for that year or whatever. Bullshit, no. I mean, you'd have people there that don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. You'd have meth addicts. No, it's not a good idea. Anyway, this article is by Stacy Selleck, and it was published back in 2016 in April, but what it's talking about is still true today. There have been a number of reports I've seen from various other outlets talking about this fact. Congress spends more time dialing for dollars than on legislative work. Fundraising a top priority mandate to D.C. politicians. Have you gotten a call from your political party asking for money lately? Fundraising is big business in Washington, D.C. So big, in fact, that your newly elected congressional representative is expected to spend half of his or her working hours dialing for dollars at a secret phone bank near Capitol Hill. You read that right, or you read that correctly. Actually, more than half their time, sometimes 6 to 8 hours a day, is spent not working on legislation. Instead, they are essentially full-time telemarketers who are told that their top priority is to raise obscene amounts of money dialing for dollars. All this during business hours when they are supposed to be working for you, the taxpayer. Shocking, isn't it? This past Sunday, April 24th, 2016, 60 Minutes broadcast an expose unveiling the outrageous phone banking operations of an uncontrollable D.C. political machine. It couldn't be clearer that Washington is more about making money than it is about effective governing. The American public already has a low opinion of Congress. At last check, they had a 14% approval rating, yet 90% of them get reelected. Let's see, what else does this say? This guy, David Jolly, a Republican congressman from Florida, claims that his responsibility as a sitting member of Congress was to raise $18,000 per day, blah, 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 blah. Jolly describes these offices as, quote, sweatshop phone booths that compromise the dignity of the office, end quote. The scheme includes private call center rooms with modern phone banking technology, prominently displayed donation leaderboards listing all of the representatives with their fundraising totals in an effort to shame those with low totals, flow-charted fundraising scripts with persuasive talking points on how to handle prospective contributors, a model daily schedule complete with a breakdown of how many hours a day is expected for each of their congressional duties. Astonishingly, only 2 hours out of 9 to 10 a day are to be spent on legislation, the job they were hired to do. This goes on. So what I wanted to say about this, all kinds of people from all kinds of different perspectives talk about how we need to get money out of politics, we need to overturn the Citizens United versus the FEC Supreme Court ruling, which you're not going to do unless you amend the Constitution, frankly. We've talked about public financing of elections and all kinds of nifty stuff. So, the answer here is staring these Congress critters right in the face. What is the answer? What did I just say? You have to pass a constitutional amendment to get rid of, corporate donorship and corporate PACs and corporate lobbyists giving money to, big money, dark money given to candidates for office that then compromises them because they feel obligated to support legislation that would favor those various corporations and industries, right? But not only that, Congress can also pass in this amendment some other campaign finance and campaign reform. Namely, they can pass a law that all of the networks, all media outlets are required to give a certain amount of time to candidates. And if we're talking about, say, like, for example, presidential candidates, any viable candidate is a candidate who is on a sufficient number of state ballots to actually win. Doesn't have to be a well-known candidate, doesn't have to be one of the two main parties, but like, for example, if the Green Party has ballot access in enough states that they could theoretically gain a sufficient number of electoral votes to win, then yeah, they would be included. The same goes for the Libertarian Party, the same goes for any other third party. So they would be given airtime, say, like after the nightly news, every night, say 30 minutes or so, and yeah, you're requiring the networks to do this, but you're also allowing them to write it off as a tax break and call it a public service announcement. So there's that. So there you have the the government financing, public financing of the campaign and the election. Also, again, there is so much of fundraising involved in running for office, and the vast majority of that money is actually spent on television ads. Well, if you don't have to spend money for television ads anymore because you get 30 minutes after the nightly news to make your case to the American people, and I would say this is going to have to be a rotating schedule. So you would have, like, say, you'd have a Green Party candidate one night, you'd have a Libertarian Party candidate the next night, you'd have a Democrat the next night, you'd have a Republican the next night, and so on. Even, in cases during the primary where you have several different candidates running for the nomination of their party, yeah. So you would give them a rotating thing, and then eventually you'd come back to the first one again and go through the process again until you get to the end of the primary season when the nominee for each of the parties is chosen, and then it's a rotating schedule between those nominees for the 4 or 5 or however many parties have a sufficient number of states where they have ballot access to win. Now, of course, when we're talking about a campaign for Senate or U.S. representative or they would if they're on the ballot, they've got ballot access in their state. So, you know, that would be fine for the news restricted just to the states, right? But like, say, for the national stuff, you could do it like CBS This Morning, AM Joy, you know, all those different morning shows that they have. Right after that goes off, have the candidates come on for those, you know, presidential offices and do their thing then, and occasionally they could do the nightly news after the nightly news, right? But anyway, so there's my idea, is that instead of having to raise vast amounts of money to buy ad time on the networks and the local stations, local affiliates and whatever, these people would be given airtime to make their case, to present their policies, to call the other candidates' names or whatever the fuck they want to do, you know, with their time. And then the networks could write off that 30-minute time slot for each night as a public service announcement, and so they get a tax, you know, a tax break for that. So I think that would be one of the great solutions, and then we could actually have, you know, legislators who have time to read the fucking legislation they're supposed to be, you know, considering and voting on. So instead of bringing out the USA Patriot Act, most people never actually read before they voted on it. I mean, the fucking thing was, what, 900 pages or something? Who has time to read that in the week or so that they had before they voted on it? Nobody. You know? Especially if they're spending most of their time across the street in one of these phone banking rooms dialing for dollars. So there's that. That's what I think needs to be done. And of course, you need to also, in this amendment, put something in that says basically that money is not free speech. Money is not a form of expression. Corporations are not people. Corporations do not qualify for personhood. They do not. Corporations are not entitled to the rights that are given to citizens, individual people in the Bill of Rights. Now, they may qualify for some other rights. Maybe they have, you know, this kind of no unlawful search and seizure or something like that. But as far as freedom of speech and freedom of the press, what is the corporation's going to start their own newspapers now? They don't need to, thanks to the Telecommunications Act that Bill Clinton signed, that allowed the situation we have today, which I bitch about constantly, in which we have 5 or 6 mega corporations that own over 90% of the media in this country. You know, these are mega corporations. This is why we have what we're sometimes we call the mainstream media, the corporate news media. And because that's what they are. They're presenting a very corporatist perspective. And it doesn't matter if it's MSNBC or Fox or CNN or whatever. They're all giving you this establishment perspective. So that's what I'm suggesting. So anybody have any comments about that? Or questions or whatever. I can see there are 3 people out there. I can see you, not really, but I can see that there are 3 people watching. So if you have anything to say about that, please chime in now. I'm gonna go ahead and add this link to my notes here that I will be copying into the video description in a bit. Anybody, anything to say at all? Yes, no, maybe. Let's see. Nothing. All right, I know there is a little bit of a delay between what I say here and when you hear it. So I think it's been long enough now that you would have heard what I what I asked. If so, I'm going to guess that there are no comments or questions, and I'm going to move on to the next topic. Let's see. What is the next topic? Okay, as I said, there are a few articles about the Green New Deal that I want to go over. Let's see, what is this? There is an article from earlier this year, I think it was January, where Joe Biden says he doesn't want to hear millennials complain and says, give me a break. No, I have no empathy for it. Give me a break. And, you know, this has recently been brought up again, and people are flipping out about it and so forth. And it was a good reason, because, yeah, no, not cool. Let's see. It looks like somebody's talking out in the... Okay. So, yeah, let's see. What else we have here? Oh, here's an interesting one and a rather disgusting one. I want to get some of the bad news out of the way first, because... or before I come to the more interesting stuff, because I don't want to leave you on a sour note or the like. So let's see here. Yeah. All right. So there's this. Yeah, this one is rather disgusting. Disgusting news. This comes from WJCT, and it says, tons of South Florida sewage finds its way into St. Johns River to devastating effect. This is written by Brendan Rivers, published on the 13th of December. And it was just recently called to my attention. It's a horrible, horrible picture. It looks really quite nasty. I remember when I visited Florida back in, I guess it was the 70s. Now, I've been there since then, but I remember going back then, and the water of the Atlantic Ocean was so different from the water of the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico was kind of murky, brownish, dirty, oily, you know, because there were a lot of oil rigs out in the Gulf. The water of the Atlantic Ocean was clear. You could see your feet, you know, easily after you're up to your neck in the ocean out there. You couldn't do that in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, you could see your feet if you were up to your knees, maybe, but once you got up to your neck, no, those feet are gone because it's just too. The water's just too dirty. But the Atlantic Ocean was nice and clean and clear, and you could look down and see yourself in the water, and that was pretty cool. I thought that was very interesting, and it was a remarkable experience for me to see the Atlantic Ocean as it was at that time. I'm sure it's not like that now. And this this article, yeah, okay. So yeah. Over the past decade, nearly 90,000 tons of sewage sludge have been trucked up from South Florida and dumped into the St. Johns River watershed, and conservationists say it's having a devastating effect. In 2007, the Florida legislature gave the waters of South Florida special protections, essentially banning the landed disposal of sewage sludge, the byproducts of wastewater treatment facilities in the Lake Okeechobee watershed. The legislation was a response to the nutrient pollution that was seriously degrading the lake's water quality. Since that ban, more than 89,000 tons of sewage sludge have been dumped into the St. Johns River watershed, and according to Lisa Rinneman, the St. Johns River keeper, quote, that's having a devastating effect on the headwaters of the St. Johns and will also have downstream impacts as it flows our way, end quote. That sewage sludge is being dumped in agricultural land near the headwaters of the St. Johns River. According to Rinneman, that practice is being pitched as an opportunity to provide free fertilizer. Quote, the idea is to provide free fertilizer to farmers, but what we're seeing is a cheap disposal opportunity for utilities, and the volumes are just overwhelming the soil and, in effect, the waterways, end quote. That's because the nutrients in the soil run off into the river. Phosphorus, which the sewage sludge has in abundance, is one of the main problem causers. Rinneman said, quote, phosphorus is one of the nutrients that fuels green toxic algae, so we're seeing toxic algae outbreaks in areas we've never seen it before in the St. Johns, end quote. The St. Johns River is more than 310 miles long. It begins in Indian River country just west of Vero Beach. It only drops in elevation by about 27 feet over that 310-mile journey, and most of that drop is in the first 100 miles, the area where the sewage sludge is being dumped. Rinneman said, quote, what happens when you dump it in the headwaters, it all flows this direction, and then there's more pollution added onto it due to septic tanks in areas, agricultural runoff, urban fertilizers, so it's just adding fuel at the very beginning of the snowball effect of nutrient pollution that begins now in the headwaters and makes its way to the St. Johns here in Jacksonville, end quote. And the article goes on a little bit longer, so, I mean, if you'd like to have a look at this, it will be in the video description. I don't always get all of the articles included in the video description before the show is over, so, I mean, if you want to come back and check in an hour or so after the show is over, the stream should have finished processing by that time, and you should be able to check out the video description with the links and so forth. And let's see here. So I'm gonna go ahead now. There was an article that came out a couple of days ago, I guess, and it was promoted heavily on Twitter, and there were people who have, of course, reacted to it, as well they should have, because it was ludicrous. And I guess there were a couple of articles, because I have a couple of articles here about it. The first one, I think, that came out was from The Hill. Again, The Hill. And there was a tweet from them on Twitter, of course. And it says, McCaskill on Ocasio-Cortez, I'm a little confused why she's the thing. The tweet says, outgoing Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri says she is, quote, a little confused, end quote, by the rapid rise of Representative-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York. Yeah, so, and it gives a photograph, a comparison photograph between the two. I'm going to just toss that up here because it's very... Wait, maybe I will. Yeah. This is a photo of the, it may take a moment for it to load up onto your screens, but this is a screen capture of the tweet from The Hill. Let's just see if I can find it here. Yeah, there we go. And we're going to put it right here. We're going to put it over here. Yeah, that looks good, eh? Yeah. So if you can see that, great. And if not, it'll be there momentarily, I reckon. I mean, you know, okay. From the photo alone, I can tell you 3 reasons. Ocasio has dark hair and Claire has dirty blonde hair. I'm being facetious, but yeah. As a dark-haired woman myself, yeah, you can take that with 1,000 grains of salt. Ocasio is svelte and attractive, and Claire is, frumpy and plain. She's an older woman. She's starting to show signs of her age. Ocasio is young and exotic-looking. Claire is in her declining years and somewhat boiled cabbage. But this is a purely superficial approach. There is also the fact that Ocasio actually won her fucking election while Claire lost hers. And the reason Claire lost is because she was exposed back in 2016 as an establishment Democrat. Anti-establishment is the way to go. Ocasio has been pretty anti-establishment in her campaign rhetoric and her subsequent rhetoric and behavior. Burners have been watching Claire since 2016 and been aware of what she is since then, and burners, especially burners for Jill, took notice of Ocasio almost as soon as she came on the scene because she sounded a lot like Bernie and Jill rolled into one. Do you get why Ocasio is the thing now, Claire, or do you need a moment? I'm going to have a look here at this article. I'm probably going to read very little of it because I don't... I find The Hill sometimes has a pretty obvious bias. It's by Avery Anapol. It was published on the 26th of December. It says, outgoing Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, Missouri, says that she is, quote, a little confused, end quote, by the rapid rise of Representative-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York. In an exit interview with CNN, McCaskill said she wishes Ocasio-Cortez well, but she advised the rising Democratic star to walk the walk. Quote, I'm a little confused why she's the thing, but it's a good example of what I'm talking about. A bright, shiny new object came out of nowhere and surprised people when she beat a very experienced congressman, end quote. I don't think I really have to go into any more detail or read any more of the article. I mean, look at this. The thing and a bright, shiny new object. I mean, come on, Claire. This is really interesting language. It's especially for a Democrat who supposedly is into all this identity politics and shit. Really? Ocasio-Cortez is the thing, and she is a bright, shiny new object. Goodness gracious. Really? And I mean, Claire is... in a red, more or less red state, and maybe thinks she has to sound like someone from the medieval period or whatever, I don't know. But, Missouri also just legalized medical cannabis. Missouri voted for an increase in minimum wage. There are all kinds of progressive policies that Missouri voters are for. The thing is, the Democratic Party has a very bad reputation. It's not entirely undeserved. And the Republicans do too. And theirs is also not entirely undeserved by any stretch of the imagination. But Claire McCaskill is a notorious kind of establishment Democrat. Not really in the South, but Missouri was a border state, in the lead up to the Civil War. And so there's kind of that Southern conservative Democrat thing going on with the Southern conservative Democrats. The Democrats in the South do tend to be a little more socially conservative, maybe even ultra-conservative, sometimes maybe even reactionary. So, I mean, this could be part of it, I don't know. But she's also, I mean, her record was talked about throughout 2016, throughout 2017, and this year as well. People that are on the progressive left, whether they be still remaining in the Democratic Party for some reason or have gone on to some third party, whether that be one of the several different parties that have the word progressive in their names, or the Green Party of the United States, or Socialist Alternative, or some other party, or maybe just independent now. People have been paying attention to these progressives, as we call them, or progressive opportunists, like Claire McCaskill and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Liz Warren, and a host of others who try to sound like they're progressive and maybe even call themselves progressive, but when you look at their voting record, and it's not pretty. There's nothing progressive about it. And again, if anybody thinks I'm doing no true Scotsman, fuck off. I've already addressed this in an article that I wrote that was published by Real Progressives earlier this month. Go look at it. You can find the link in my stream of a couple of weeks ago, I guess, or a week ago, or somewhere. Or you can come join my Discord and check it out. It's in the channel that gives links to my articles. So I'm going to read just a little more of this article here from the Hill. Ocasio-Cortez, a self-described Democratic socialist, shocked the political world when she unseated longtime Democratic Representative Joseph Crowley in New York's 14th Congressional District primary earlier this year. She has since rocketed to political stardom and has repeatedly drawn national attention to her calls for progressive legislation, as well as to her fiery responses to conservative figures. McCaskill said of the 29-year-old, quote, "She's now talked about a lot. I'm not sure what she's done yet to generate that kind of enthusiasm, but I wish her well. I hope she hangs the moon," end quote. So that's, that was nice on Claire's part. Except, the woman's not even in office yet. She won't be sworn in until January. So, I mean, what could she have done yet? Well, what she has done yet is she went and took part in the people camped out in Nancy Pelosi's office who were protesting for a Green New Deal, environmental legislation, paying attention to the very real climate catastrophe we have coming down the pipeline, with Green New Deal, federal jobs guarantee, all that stuff, she's an advocate for national improvement and expanded Medicare for all. She speaks her mind, and she doesn't always know exactly what she's talking about, but her intentions are good, I'm convinced. I'm cautiously optimistic about her. I've said this before. But, I'm optimistic. I think she might actually be what she says she is, but I'm cautious because there have been some mixed signals. I don't think there was any need for her to praise John McCain, and I certainly didn't like some of the other people who were calling McCain a champion for peace and shit like that. No, McCain never met a war he didn't like. Don't speak ill of the dead. Well, fuck you. The only thing that I have an obligation to about speaking ill of the dead is not to satirize them, because satire of the dead is unlawful according to the cultural traditions of my people. But, yeah, I'm going to tell the truth about these people. I won't satirize them. There are things I would have said about Ronald Reagan when he was alive that I don't say now because they are satirical. But I will still talk about Reagan and tell the truth about him and how bad he was as a president by trying to undo everything FDR ever tried to do. Anyway. And the article goes on a little bit longer. So, if you want to see this, it also will be in the video description. I think I have another article on this particular subject. I don't know if I want to read it or not, because it's been going on for a while already, and there are some other things that I do want to look at here. So just let me type this in here. McCaskill? Let me see if I spelled her name right. I don't want to be obnoxious. not too obnoxious. Anyway, yeah, I got it right. Okay, so I'll just copy the link and put it into my notes here to add later to the video description. And okay, so let me have a look here into the live text chat. Hi, Q-rated Coon, you. How are ya? The dead and the damned, not familiar enough with U.S. law to comment. You're in the U.K. What? I'm not sure which law we were talking about at the time. So, but let's see. What did I talked about? Oh yes, I was talking about the Congress critters and their dialing for dollars, and the South Florida sewage and stuff. So I'm not sure what you are referring to. We haven't even been going for an hour and a half, so I can go ahead and talk about some more of these kind of marginal things that I have on the agenda here. The big thing that I want to talk about is, I've already talked about one of the big things, which is the Russiagate conspiracy theory, and the next big thing that I want to talk about is the Green New Deal. I've talked about it several times in recent streams, so I will be talking about it again. I'll probably be talking about it quite a lot as time goes on. So expect more news about the Green New Deal and more history about it and so forth. But I have some articles I want to go over today to talk about this as well. So I have another kind of disappointing article. This comes from RT International. And it's not an inaccurate presentation here. It's published on the 26th of December and edited on the 27th. So there has been an update maybe or an edit since then, since it was published. I don't see an author attributed. Maybe that's at the end. Sometimes instead of at the top, they put the author's name at the end. But this is, as I said, from RT International, and it is called PC Gone Wild, Traditions That Will Never Be the Same After 2018. And it's a somewhat satirical piece, but it's not completely hyperbolic. So, and I'm going to actually read probably most of this because it was kind of interesting. And it does talk about one of the groups, one of the camps in the U.S. today, which calls itself progressive, and it's also one of the camps in the U.K. I have identified at least 4 different camps in the U.S. which claim to be progressive, and at least 2 different camps in the U.K. which claim to be progressive. So this is talking about what I call regressive outrage mongers, or some people would call them postmodernists, which is giving them way too much credit since they don't really understand what postmodernism is. Some people have called them social justice warriors or SJWs, which is giving them way too much credit because they don't actually advocate for social justice at all. In fact, most of them, if they knew what social justice was and where it came from, would be kind of scandalized at the idea that they're supporting what was originally a Catholic social teaching. Anyway, so they sometimes call themselves progressives because most of them were members of or sympathetic to the Democratic Party, and there were already some Democrats who had tried to take the name back at the end of the 80s, which was really strange because they didn't change any of their perspectives. They didn't adopt any progressive ideals. They just stopped calling themselves liberals and started calling themselves progressives, and I've explained why that is also in my article published by Real Progressives recently, this month. I guess it was, the 16th or something like that. So go check out realprogressivesusa.com. You can find my article. It may still be in the featured position at the moment. It's called The Name Progressive, and there's anyway. As we bid farewell to another year, it looks like we'll also be saying goodbye to some iconic pieces of cultural history along with it. Songs, fairy tales, hand gestures. For the PC police, nothing has been off limits in 2018. Here is a look at some of the things we'll miss as we trudge wearily on toward a heavily sanitized world where nobody ever feels offended again. Number 1, Christmas songs. They had a good run, but 2018 was the year the PC Grinch stole Christmas songs. After 74 years, Baby It's Cold Outside was discovered to have a, quote, rapey, end quote, vibe, and radio stations decided time's up for the Christmas classic. Next for the chop was I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, which could be traumatizing to children. It's being voted the best Christmas song of all time, but even the iconic Irish classic Fairy Tale of New York wasn't safe. Far too many offensive words in that one. What next? Driving Home for Christmas promotes air pollution? So I've talked about this Baby It's Cold Outside last year when this same shit came up. And I've talked about it more recently and basically just repeated what I said last year. In fact, I think I took a screenshot of my tweet or whatever from last year, or my tweet thread or whatever it was, and just posted that. Might have posted a link to it, I don't remember. Anyway, the point that I was making then is the word rapey is a very childish sounding thing to say. I don't like the word. I think it's making light of a very serious violation of personal sovereignty and body sovereignty and so forth. And not only that, but the original performance of the song actually features 2 performances, and it the first one has Ricardo Montalban playing the role of the wolf and a woman playing the role of the mouse in the song there, where he is pursuing her and she's like, I need to go home and I ought to say no and stuff like that. And the other performance, which is part of the same presentation in the movie, is Neptune's Daughter. Now I forget who the woman was, but she's the one taking the role of the wolf, and the man is playing the role of the mouse. And I think that was Red Skelton was the guy there. So anyway, from the very beginning, it was very obvious that, the man or the woman could be the aggressor, the pursuer, and the man or the woman could be the person who's like, I probably ought to go. And the thing that really stands out is kind of the slut-shaming that is implied, in particular in the first performance of the song. The girl is talking about how, what will my parents say if I spend the night here with you? What will my neighbors say? What will, everybody will be talking about me tomorrow. I need to get out of here so that I don't besmirch my reputation and so forth. So, I mean, there's nothing rapey about the song. It's fucking ridiculous for people to say that, and some, I've said this many times before, some of these kids really don't know what sexism is. If they had lived in the 50s, 60s, even 70s, maybe even the early 80s, they would have a better clue what they're talking about. They're trying to fight battles which have largely been won already. I'm not saying there's no sexism anymore, because there obviously is, but a guy's going to look at your ass, get over it. It happens, it's nature, and it's not sexual assault for a guy to look at your ass. It's not sexual assault for a guy to look at you. It's not sexual assault for a guy to compliment you, whether you find him, unappealing or not. None of that is harassment. If someone says, hey sugar, why don't you come over here and keep the rain off me with those tits, yeah, that's kind of sexually harassing. But really, if you can't handle that what are you going to do when you get out in the real world, man? Come on. Yeah, it's offensive, and it can make you feel, your cheeks burn and so forth, but sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now, there are things they can go on and say, even more explicit, and then I think you might have a case. Someone whistles at me, I take it as a compliment, but, I have a boyfriend, so nobody get any ideas. I'm faithful to my boyfriend and stuff, and, but yeah, I mean, I like to be appreciated, and I like for someone to appreciate the time and effort I put into looking my best, and, doing my hair and doing my makeup and picking out nice clothes and stuff. But, women really don't dress for men. Women dress for each other. We dress for each other. That's something that so many people just don't get. So, let me continue with the article here. Mini rant there. Number 2, fairy tales. Many of us fondly remember watching and rewatching movies like Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, and reading and rereading fairy tale classics like Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, and The Ugly Duckling. The children of the future will know no such pleasure. This year, Keira Knightley, of all people, Keira Knightley led the charge, banning many of them from her children's bookshelves, lest they impart any negative messages. Soon there will be no more ugly ducklings to scare children with horrifying themes like bullying and image consciousness. There will be no Sleeping Beauty awakened from her slumber by a prince's non-consensual kiss. Oh, and speaking of consent, did God sexually assault Mary by getting her pregnant with Jesus without prior approval? That's another debate if you dare wade into it. This is actually an older thing, and it was originally kind of a joke. I mean, I think it was, I want to say it was George Carlin, but it might have been someone else. I remember pointing out that when the angel appears to Mary in the story of the Annunciation, he doesn't ask Mary, he tells her, basically, the Holy Spirit's going to knock you up. And she doesn't, there is not like, so I mean, yeah, but it's just a myth, guys, so, come on. Number 3, clapping. By now you will probably have attended at least one event at which a couple of people decided to forego engaging in the, quote, non-inclusive, end quote, traditional clapping and cheering methods of expressing appreciation and opted instead for jazz hands or clicking of the fingers. I've been jazz handing for a long time instead of clapping my hands, but it doesn't have anything to do with not wanting to offend anyone. I could give a fuck less. But I do it because I'm a jazz person. I was in a jazz band when I was in college. I am a big fan of various types of jazz. So, it's kind of a thing that I do. I mean, and it comes from, to me, I think it comes from the show The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, because there was Maynard G. Krebs, and that was played by Gilligan. What's his name? Bob Denver? Yeah, was that right? I don't know. Anyway, who played Maynard G. Krebs, the beatnik, who was, fond of Thelonious Monk and so forth, and he would, like, clap his hands instead of, snap his fingers instead of clapping his hands, because that's how the jazz beatniks showed their appreciation for something. So, I mean, yeah, I've been doing it for a long time, and big deal. But so apparently this is all now being done in an effort to ensure deaf people, anxious people, or anyone with sensory issues feel as included as possible. There's no word yet on what we'll be replacing jazz hands with when they discovered that it clearly isn't inclusive to visually impaired people. Oh my goodness. See, this is just outrage culture. Outrage on behalf of people who usually don't give a shit, and playing victim on behalf of people who don't care. It's just kind of this paternalistic, what used to be called white man's burden thing, this attitude that white people had to take Christianity and enlightenment and industrialization and capitalism to the rest of the world, and God did that fuck everything up, Anyway. So the article continues, so with 2018 we wave goodbye to clapping, unless waving is also now offensive. We're not quite sure. Number 4, gendered phrases. This was also the year when the PC Brigade tried even harder to get rid of the words woman and women and replace them with WOMXN, because the word women is apparently racist and transphobic. Even some major brands were almost suckered into the PC ploy. If they had their way, we'd also be doing away with words like mother and father and sticking to the more bland parent in a bid to never cause any offense. This follows a 2017 effort to replace the phrase pregnant women with pregnant people to avoid excluding transgender people. Oh, and the Nativity's 3 wise men? No, thank you. This Christmas we'll have the 3 wise people instead. And then there's a photo of a bunch of naked people standing out in a garden full of topiary hedges and whatnot. It's very kind of creepy looking. It reminds me of like Children of the Damned or Village of the Damned or something. You know, it's kind of weird. I mean, they're all facing away from you, but it's a bunch of women completely naked, showing their butt cheeks, and they're all facing this one direction. I don't know what the hell they're doing, and it just looks really fucking weird. So anyway, if you want to see it, the link to the article will be in the video description eventually. Number 5, Halloween costumes. Remember those exciting Halloween nights dressing up as witches and wizards, or reimagining yourself as a beautiful Pocahontas for the evening? Well, 2018 surely taught you better. Witches are now culturally offensive, and costumes depicting characters from minority backgrounds are highly problematic. At first, we thought strong female characters like Elsa from Frozen and Moana were wonderful, but we soon discovered that Elsa costumes promote white beauty. Oh my God, the horror. And Moana costumes promote cultural appropriation. Motherfuckers, there is no goddamn such thing as cultural appropriation. That's a made-up term to allow people to feign outrage and play victim. The legitimate term used in cultural anthropology is cultural misappropriation. It only applies to cultures which are in danger of dying out. For example, you have in the Scottish Highlands and Islands, Gaelic-speaking culture. There are only 70,000 native speakers of the language left. And it also doesn't apply to things like cuisine and attire, so, I mean, guess what? I'm from Texas. Tamales and tacos and things like that, they're part of my culture because I grew up with that. I was weaned on Mexican food. So if I want to start a fucking taco stand whenever I get back to the Pacific Northwest and somebody wants to fuck with me about it, I'm going to punch them in the face. Okay? I'm warning you now. I'm not going to do that, actually. I'm not going to start a taco stand or whatever. But if I want to cook Mexican food, bitch, I have as much right to do that as any Mexican does because it's part of Texas culture where I grew up. And you know what? Everybody has a right to cook it because Mexicans didn't invent some of these foods. I mean, tamales are eaten in Cuba, they're eaten in Guatemala, all over the place. The tortillas, burritos are made from made with flour tortillas. Flour tortillas are actually something that colonists did based on what the natives were doing, which was making corn tortillas. And that's right, Native Americans invented the corn tortilla, not Mexicans. This was done in the Southwest. It was done in the Great Plains. These kind of corn flatbread, basically. It's not something specific to any one culture, so grow up and get over that, too. But whenever they talk about cultural misappropriation in cultural anthropology, they're not talking about extraneous, superficial characteristics that are marginally related to a given culture. They're talking about deep things like worldview, gods and goddesses, religious practices, and so forth. You can adopt some of these with respect, but ripping them off to enrich your sterile, spiritually sterile religion, no, that's just bogus. I mean, it would be like the example where you have a lot of actual Celtic people who take offense at neo-Wiccans ripping off Celtic god and goddess names to stick on to their religion that was invented in the 20th century. And what it is a kind of ritual is more or less from ceremonial magic with a lot of kind of New Age philosophy, Neo-Wicca. Actual Wicca has a little bit different philosophy, but yeah, there's nothing Celtic about it. They stick a few Celtic god and goddess names in there and lift a couple of myths from this or that Celtic culture, sometimes several different Celtic cultures, and they claim that they're practicing Celtic Wicca. It's not Celtic Wicca. It's just Wicca with Celtic flavoring. That's it. Okay, that is cultural misappropriation. And why? Because those cultures are actually in danger of, what is sometimes called cultural genocide. They've been suppressed by Anglo-centric perspectives in Britain and in Ireland for a very long time, and in France by French Franco-centric perspectives. Brittany is an insular Celtic culture that is part of the nation of France. So, I mean, English have passed laws to prohibit the speaking of Gaelic and Irish and Cornish and Welsh and everything, Manx. So, I mean, it's not a natural death. It's something that was done to them and has continued through propaganda and now has a cultural cringe involved where people are ashamed to be Scottish or Welsh or Irish or Cornish or Manx. You'll have some people who have bought into this lie that Irish or Gaelic is only useful for picking potatoes and they want to make a living. And that's not true. There's a rich cultural tradition, an oral tradition still surviving in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, which is dying out because the tradition bearers don't have young people to pass the traditions on to. And this is not good. This is not good. We are all that much poorer when a culture is wiped out through whatever means. Anyway. The article says then, in fact, the many ways in which you could have been unintentionally offensive in 2018 were endless. Number 6, animal phrases. Perhaps because we've already put an end to all the terms that could offend humans in 2018, we moved on to animals. Earlier this month, animal welfare organization PETA suggested doing away with certain well-known phrases like kill two birds with one stone and bring home the bacon, and replacing them with more animal-friendly ones like feed two birds with one scone, which is scoon actually, and bring home the bagels. Now animal welfare is all well and good, but we're pretty sure they can't feel offended by animal-themed idioms. And then it gives a tweet from PETA, whatever, which says, quote, words matter, and as our understanding of social justice evolves, our language evolves along with it. Here's how to remove speciesism from your daily conversations. And he gives a pic. So, end quote. And then the article concludes, fare thee well, simpler times, we'll miss you. Yeah, so I mean, this is satire, and satire is intended to poke fun at and mock people who are worthy of being mocked, basically. Hello, classy liberal. Let's see. The Dead and the Damned. Which song is it that you can't remember? I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus is kind of it was kind of a popular song. I remember hearing it on the radio quite a lot in the 60s and 70s. I think it might have been newish at the time. I saw Mommy kissing Santa Claus underneath the mistletoe last night, blah, blah, blah. If you're talking about the Baby It's Cold Outside, that's Baby It's Cold Outside, I ought to go home. You know, that kind of thing. So, I'm not gonna seeing more of it because I don't want to get hit with a DMCA or anything like that. Although I'm not sure it's still, I don't know, might not be in copyright anymore. It's been, I think the original movie was in 1939 or 1949? I don't remember. Anyway. So, let's see here. I do have, okay, so let me go ahead on and talk about this Green New Deal stuff. This is the one big story aside from the Russiagate conspiracy theory that I did want to address. Let me see which one of these articles I want to look at first, because I do have several articles about this. And I'm not going to read all of any of them. I may not read all of the articles at all, but I do want to go over a couple or three of them. Let's see here. Yeah, let's see. 1, 2. One, two, 3. Yeah, okay, I guess I can do all three of these. I think there are only 3 articles that I have on this. That won't take too long because I'm not going to go into a lot of ranting about them. So, let me see which one I want to present to you first. Okay. So, we have... this article comes from EcoWatch, and it is, it's published on the 21st of December, and I don't see an author's name. It says, "Are Democratic Party leaders shying away from a Green New Deal? Activists call for a Green New Deal as a protest in House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi's office," and gives a photo. Congressional Democratic leaders have tapped Florida Representative Kathy Castor. Now, I talked about her last week, I believe it was, in some detail. Have tapped Florida Representative Kathy Castor to chair a renewed climate change committee, the Congresswoman confirmed to E&E News Thursday, dampening the hopes of activists and progressive Democrats that the committee would focus on drafting a Green New Deal to provide jobs while transitioning to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. Castor is not one of the 43 House members who have pledged to back a select committee to draft the deal and to reject campaign donations from fossil fuel companies, according to the most recent tally from the Sunrise Movement, which has emerged as a key grassroots backer of the idea. Let's see. Castor told E&E News when asked about the Green New Deal, quote, "I think they have some terrific ideas, but that's not going to be our sole focus," end quote. Castor's selection seems to return House Democrats to the plan for a generic climate change committee that the party's House leader Nancy Pelosi first floated after the Democrats won control of the House in the midterm election and before activists from the Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats staged a sit-in in her office a month ago and launched the Green New Deal into the national discourse, the Huffington Post reported. I will point out that there were Green Party members who were part of this sit-in as well. I don't know why EcoWatch doesn't mention that. There's been a lot of kind of, this is our idea, we came up with this. The Green New Deal comes from the Green Party and nobody ever points that out. Yeah, maybe. There's some debate over who came up with the name, but certainly in early 2017 there were at least 2 different, there was the Green New Deal working group of the Global Greens, and there was an article in, I think it was the New York Times, by Thomas Friedman, which both used the term, and Thomas Friedman's first mention of it in his article was in quotation marks, which might suggest that he had gotten the name from somewhere else. So attributing the coinage of the term to him might be inaccurate. It doesn't really matter where the idea came from, however, and I do think that it's a little bit childish to insist that, you know, you should credit us with coming up with the idea, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's very obvious that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got the idea from the Green Party because she's certainly familiar with the Green Party. She's mentioned them several times. But I don't know that she's ever actually said, I got this idea from them. And, you know, okay, I mean, I think it would be nice if she did, but I don't think it's entirely necessary. And there have been some Green Party people who've been basically wetting themselves over the idea that Ocasio is doing this, and it's not their Green New Deal. It's a different thing. It's so different. It's a watered-down neoliberal plot, blah, blah, blah. They're stealing our names and our ideas, and they're turning them into neoliberal bullshit. And yet, on the Green Party's own website, there is an article urging Green Party members to support Ocasio's efforts and pointing out that the only thing that it lacks that is in the Green Party's version of the Green New Deal is, you know, slashing military spending and ending imperialistic wars for profit. So it ain't like it's as bad as some of these people are making out. Again, people need to actually be rational and respond, which requires actually considering and thinking and looking into stuff rather than being emotional and reacting, you know, just, oh my God, it can't be, I don't even know what it is, but I'm going to piss myself over it. No, don't do that. Anyway, some of this I've already discussed, this particular article, some of this I've already discussed previously. Claire McCaskill, bullshit about First Amendment, doesn't know if she can exclude people from the committee if they don't take, I've talked about this, so I mean, there's a little bit more. Again, the article link will be in the video description, so... Well, if I can actually copy it here. I don't know. It's not really wanting to cooperate with me, apparently. Let's see. Jesus fuck, I don't know what the hell's going on here. Okay. There we go. Yeah. Copy that. And paste it in here. Yeah. And... doobie-doobie-doo-ah. So I do have a couple more articles about this that I want to address or quote or read from or whatever and call to your attention so that you can have a look at them yourselves. But let's see. Let me figure out which one is the next one I want to look at. I think this one... Yeah, let me look at this one here. Get this open. Just one moment here while I figure out what I'm doing. Okay. So this comes from, let me see, I think this comes from In These Times, InTheseTimes.com. This is, no, hang on, I just accidentally opened some. Okay. This is from December 21st. It's by Christopher D. Cook. And it says, "We can't afford to let Nancy Pelosi bury the Green New Deal. Incoming Speaker creates climate committee with limited powers, undermining a far more ambitious initiative." As I've pointed out in one of the shows that I've already done last week or the week before, the committee that they're setting up is supposed to not have subpoena power, whereas the committee it will be replacing did. So, yeah, that seems a little like sabotaged from the beginning. So anyway, let me continue with the article here. Who's this? Who says this? It's in quotation marks, but I'm not sure Anyway, it says, achieving the goals outlined in the resolution for a select committee on a Green New Deal are the bare minimum we need to preserve life as we know it for our generation. Anything less from our political leaders is a betrayal of young people around the world. So that's a quote from somewhere. As House Democratic leaders prepare to reclaim power this January, they are clamping down on insurgent progressive initiatives like the Green New Deal, which could be sidelined in favor of a broader climate committee with limited powers. Despite pledges from at least 43 Democrats to support a Green New Deal Select Committee, including prominent representatives like Barbara Lee, Democrat of California, and John Lewis, Democrat of Georgia, incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, derailed the move on Thursday, a week ago, by creating a climate committee with no explicit commitment to crafting a Green New Deal. Thursday afternoon, the Huffington Post reported that Pelosi picked Florida Representative Kathy Castor, Democrat of Florida, to head the new climate committee, which may include members who take campaign money from the fossil fuel industry. Yes, way to sabotage it there, Nancy. The setback threatens to derail one of the more hopeful and fast-rising progressive initiatives in the new Congress and comes as scientists worldwide warn we have 12 years to stem the climate crisis from yet more catastrophic and irreversible disaster. Ocasio-Cortez's proposal would have created a select committee to craft a full Green New Deal plan by 2020. Pelosi's move, at minimum, significantly stalls that effort, even as the climate crisis clock ticks away. Pelosi's move must be approved by the House Rules Committee in January to be official. On Friday, Rules Chairman Representative Jim McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts, announced he is already crafting a proposal for a climate committee which, according to Energy and Environment News, quote, will have no legislative or subpoena power, nor will it be specifically tasked with crafting a Green New Deal bill, end quote. Further confirming the committee's limited abilities, Representative Steny Hoyer, a Democrat of Maryland, quote, said Wednesday that it was his understanding that the committee wouldn't have the legal authority to demand documents, end quote. The Hill reported. Hoyer told reporters, quote, my expectation is it will not have subpoena power. It will be a recommendatory committee to the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Environmental Committees, end quote. According to The Hill, quote, a Democratic leadership aide later confirmed the lack of subpoena power, end quote. Pelosi's office did not immediately respond to calls and emails from In These Times requesting clarification. On the phone, one staffer cited, quote, the government shutdown, end quote, as cause for their inability to reply. Response came swiftly via Twitter from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the incoming Democratic representative for New York, who is one of the chief advocates of the Green New Deal. Quote, our ultimate end goal isn't a select committee. Our goal is to treat climate change like the serious existential threat it is by drafting an ambitious solution on the scale necessary, aka a Green New Deal, to get it done. A weak committee misses the point and endangers people, end quote. So, I mean, yeah, I've read that before, at least once, maybe twice now. And this article goes on a little bit longer, so, I mean, it's an interesting article. It has some good points to consider, and certainly I would recommend that you check it out. And as usual, it will be in the video description. Just let me copy the title here and paste it into my notes. I'm going to try to have these into the video description. Oh shit. I'm going to try to have these into the, into the video description before the show's over. So, you know, if you want to hang around after the show and go through all my stuff and see where it came from and read the full articles and so forth, they should be there for you by then. I have one more article on this particular topic, the Green New Deal and the the establishment Democrat opposition efforts to it, which is worth some discussion here. So let me just Gonna have to have another little sip of my soda here in order to keep talking without... I mean, I talked for over 2 hours last night, so I'm a little vocally strained at the moment. Need a little liquid and syrup there from the Pepsi to coat my throat. Alright, so the next article I have on this topic is, let me see, what is it? That's not it. That's not it. This is it. Yeah, this is from the New Republic. Yay! Let's see. So, this is from the New Republic. It is published on the 27th of December by David Davin. No, I'm sorry. It's published on the 26th of December. Anyway, just a couple of days, three days ago. It's from the New Republic. And the title of the article is, "The Left is Taking Aim at Pelosi's Deficit Obsession." Now, while you may not think this has anything to do with the Green New Deal, it does. Pelosi, or as some of us have sometimes called her, Paygozy, favors this pay-go thing, pay as you go. So, you know, you have to tax in order to spend. Well, you don't actually have to tax in order to spend. We have a sovereign, free-floating, non-convertible fiat currency. We can't just print money out of thin air forever as much as we want. It is constrained by actual resources, you know, so there is a limit, but as long as we have the resources to, you know, to cover it, yeah, we can. And there's taxes do not actually fund spending. Taxes just take currency out of circulation. And there are a couple of reasons this is done. One is to encourage the people to impute value to the currency, because it is a fiat currency, not backed by any physical commodity. And the other is to take excess currency out of circulation to prevent, you know, say, any one group or individual from gaining sufficient currency to disrupt sort of our democratic republic, which is unfortunately happening nevertheless because of all the tax breaks to the wealthy and so on. And that's another thing, is to take excess currency from those who are getting too much of it. So, but as far as funding spending, you might be able to make the case for the Social Security Fund. There are supposedly actual trust funds that, you know, blah, blah, blah. There's several, I think it's $1.7 trillion, so don't let anybody tell you it's in danger of running out of money. But, yeah, apart from that one particular FICA tax, nothing else. Because this Social Security stuff is paid for by a separate tax, and it's treated in a different way from every other tax. Every other tax, the government issues the currency. They don't need to take it from people in order to finance their spending. They issue the currency themselves, and they cannot become insolvent in their own currency. That's just a fact of economics. And people want to talk about inflation. Well, yeah, you know, there was a time when increasing the amount of currency in circulation inherently and necessarily devalued it. That was when we were on the gold standard. The reason it inherently and necessarily devalued the currency was because there was only a certain amount of gold in Fort Knox, and each dollar bill was worth a certain percentage of that stack of gold. So if you added more currency into circulation, like say you double the amount of currency in circulation, then every dollar would be worth half as much as it was before. I mean, it's tautologous that would be the case. It's a necessary truth. It's trite, trivial truth. But it is a necessary truth. A necessary truth.